On the quiet morning of December 7, 1941, as the sun slowly rose over the calm waters of the Pacific, no one at Pearl Harbor could imagine that within minutes the course of world history would violently change. American sailors were preparing for a routine Sunday, battleships sat motionless like steel giants at rest, and the sense of distance from the raging war in Europe gave many Americans a fragile belief that the United States was still safe behind two vast oceans. Yet beneath this calm surface, years of political tension, economic pressure, and strategic calculation had been building toward an explosion. The attack on Pearl Harbor did not come out of nowhere. It was the final result of a slow-burning conflict between two expanding powers whose interests had collided across Asia and the Pacific. Japan, driven by ambition and desperation, and the United States, determined to protect its economic influence and principles, were moving step by step toward a confrontation that neither side fully understood until it was too late. Throughout the 1930s, Japan had been transforming itself into a militarized empire. With limited natural resources and a rapidly growing population, Japanese leaders believed that survival depended on expansion. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 marked the beginning of Japan's aggressive push into China and Southeast Asia. By the late 1930s, Japan was deeply involved in a brutal war with China, consuming enormous amounts of oil, steel, and raw materials. At the same time, the United States was watching Japan's expansion with increasing concern. America had major economic interests in China and the Pacific, and it strongly opposed the idea of military conquest replacing international law. While the United States remained officially neutral as World War II erupted in Europe, it began using economic pressure as a weapon against Japan, believing sanctions could force Tokyo to slow or reverse its expansion. The situation escalated dramatically in 1940 and 1941. When Japan aligned itself with Germany and Italy through the Tripartite Pact, American leaders saw this as a direct threat to global stability. Japan's move into French Indochina pushed the conflict even closer to a breaking point. In response, the United States imposed severe economic sanctions, including restrictions on scrap metal, aviation fuel, and eventually oil. This final step was devastating for Japan, which relied on American oil for nearly 80% of its supply. To Japanese military planners, the oil embargo felt like a noose tightening around the nation's neck. Without new sources of fuel, Japan's Navy and Air Force would be crippled within months. For Japan's leaders, the choice seemed brutal but clear: accept American demands and abandon imperial ambitions, or strike out to secure the resources of Southeast Asia by force. Diplomatic negotiations continued through 1941, but they were built on deep mistrust. American officials demanded that Japan withdraw from China and respect the sovereignty of other nations. Japan, already committed to its empire and controlled increasingly by military leaders, saw these demands as humiliating and unacceptable. While diplomats exchanged messages in Washington, Japanese naval planners were secretly preparing for war. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, understood that Japan could not win a long war against the industrial power of the United States. His strategy was therefore based on shock and speed. He believed that a sudden, devastating blow against the U.S. Pacific Fleet could cripple American naval power long enough for Japan to seize territory across Asia and fortify its defenses, forcing the United States to negotiate rather than fight a prolonged war. Pearl Harbor became the center of this daring plan. Located in Hawaii, it was the main base of the U.S. Pacific Fleet and symbolized American power in the Pacific. Japanese intelligence closely studied the harbor's layout, ship movements, and defensive weaknesses. They trained pilots in secret to attack ships in shallow water and modified torpedoes to avoid hitting the harbor floor. All the while, American commanders in Hawaii underestimated the possibility of an air attack, believing sabotage or a distant naval engagement was more likely. The idea that Japan could launch a carrier-based strike across thousands of miles of ocean seemed improbable to many, and this misjudgment would prove catastrophic. As 1941 drew to a close, both nations stood at the edge of war, though only one side knew exactly when it would begin. Japan's strike force sailed across the Pacific under strict radio silence, moving through harsh weather to avoid detection. In Washington, American leaders sensed that conflict was coming but did not know where or how it would strike. Many believed the Philippines or British territories in Southeast Asia were the most likely targets. Pearl Harbor, far from the Asian mainland, still felt secure. This dangerous gap between expectation and reality set the stage for one of the most shocking military attacks in modern history, an attack that would shatter America's isolation, awaken a sleeping giant, and pull the United States fully into the global catastrophe of World War II. The morning of December 7, 1941, began like any other Sunday at Pearl Harbor, with sailors performing routine maintenance, officers planning the week ahead, and families of servicemen attending church or enjoying a rare day of leisure. Yet, in the sky above, nearly 350 Japanese aircraft were already in position, launched from 6 aircraft carriers that had silently crossed the vast Pacific under cover of darkness and stormy weather. The first wave struck just before 8 a.m., descending with terrifying precision. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters tore through the calm sky, their engines roaring like thunder over the harbor. The Japanese had meticulously planned the attack, taking advantage of early intelligence about ship positions, fuel depots, and defensive installations. Torpedoes were modified to operate in shallow waters, bombs were engineered to penetrate armored decks, and pilots had been trained extensively to hit key targets in a synchronized strike that would leave the U.S. Pacific Fleet reeling. What followed was a meticulously orchestrated storm of destruction, a calculated attempt to paralyze American naval power in the Pacific before it could even respond. As the bombs and torpedoes rained down, chaos erupted across Pearl Harbor. Battleships like the USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma were among the primary targets, with explosions tearing through decks and sending plumes of smoke into the sky. Sailors scrambled for cover, many thrown off their feet by concussive blasts or the sudden listing of ships. Fighter planes tried to rise, but Japanese Zeros strafed airfields with relentless accuracy, destroying aircraft before they could take off. Anti-aircraft guns roared, but the suddenness and scale of the attack left many crews struggling to respond effectively. Smoke, fire, and screams filled the air, turning what had been a peaceful Sunday morning into a nightmarish scene of destruction. Within minutes, the harbor was a chaotic mix of burning oil, sinking vessels, and twisted metal, with the deafening noise of explosions punctuated by desperate shouts of orders and cries of fear. Civilians and military personnel alike were caught in the maelstrom, witnessing the sudden vulnerability of a nation that had believed itself insulated by oceans and distance. The Japanese attack unfolded in 2 distinct waves, each carefully timed to maximize destruction. The first wave focused on battleships and airfields, while the second targeted repair facilities, fuel depots, and remaining ships. Precision was the hallmark of the operation, as Japanese pilots executed their maneuvers with near-military choreography, hitting the most strategically valuable assets while avoiding unnecessary dispersal of effort. Throughout the attack, American sailors displayed extraordinary courage, attempting to fire back, rescue comrades from burning ships, and save critical equipment from total destruction. Despite the shock and devastation, the human will to resist was evident. Crews manned guns while flames consumed their decks, and rescue parties plunged into smoke-filled water to save injured colleagues. Yet, the sheer scale of the Japanese plan meant that even the most valiant efforts could only mitigate, not prevent, massive losses. The destruction wrought by the attack was immediate and catastrophic. 8 battleships were present in the harbor, with the USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma suffering near-total destruction. The Arizona exploded after a bomb ignited its forward ammunition magazine, killing over 1,000 sailors in an instant, while the Oklahoma capsized, trapping hundreds inside. In total, 21 ships were damaged or sunk, and nearly 200 aircraft were destroyed or severely damaged. Casualties were staggering. Over 2,400 Americans were killed, and nearly 1,200 wounded. Entire units of sailors were wiped out within seconds, and many more were left struggling to survive in oil-slicked water amidst debris and burning wreckage. The attack was not just a military blow, it was a psychological shock, shaking the confidence of a nation that had believed itself insulated from global conflict. Reports of heroism spread even amid the carnage, with small groups of men fighting fires, manning anti-aircraft positions, and rescuing survivors, proving that bravery often persists even in the face of overwhelming devastation. By the time the second wave of Japanese planes departed, the harbor was a smoldering ruin, a stark testament to the precision and lethality of the surprise attack. Ships that had taken decades to build were now partially submerged or burning beyond repair, while airfields lay in ruins, leaving the United States temporarily blind in the Pacific. Rescue and damage control operations began immediately, as surviving personnel attempted to save as many ships and lives as possible, but the scale of destruction made recovery a daunting task. The attack achieved its primary goal. The Pacific Fleet was severely crippled, and the United States was forced to confront the reality of a war that had suddenly arrived at its doorstep. Yet, in the midst of tragedy, the American resolve began to harden, setting the stage for a response that would shift the global balance and ultimately draw the United States fully into World War II, changing the trajectory of history forever. The morning after the attack, December 8, 1941, the United States awoke to a nation transformed overnight. News of the Pearl Harbor strike spread with staggering speed across radio broadcasts, newspapers, and word of mouth, igniting shock, anger, and disbelief among Americans who had long believed themselves insulated from the global conflict raging in Europe and Asia. President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress that very day, delivering his famous Day of Infamy speech, capturing both the outrage and determination of a stunned nation. He described the attack as sudden and deliberate, emphasizing the scale of the destruction while framing it as a direct assault on the principles and security of the United States. The speech galvanized Congress, which swiftly declared war on Japan with overwhelming bipartisan support. In an instant, a country that had carefully maintained its neutrality for years found itself fully engaged in a war that would span continents and reshape the modern world. Public sentiment shifted as well. Isolationist voices, which had dominated American politics for much of the 1930s, were suddenly silenced by a collective desire for justice and retribution, transforming ordinary citizens into participants in a national war effort. The mobilization of the United States was rapid and multifaceted. Military enlistment surged as thousands of men and women rushed to join the armed forces, eager to serve their country and respond to the attack. Factories that had previously produced consumer goods were converted almost overnight to manufacture ships, tanks, planes, and munitions, demonstrating America's industrial might. The government implemented rationing programs and war bonds to ensure that resources were directed toward the war effort, while propaganda campaigns encouraged unity, sacrifice, and patriotic duty. Intelligence and reconnaissance operations were expanded as military planners sought to understand Japanese capabilities, anticipate their next moves, and prevent another devastating strike. Across the Pacific and in American territories like the Philippines and Guam, commanders scrambled to shore up defenses, repair damaged installations, and prepare for a war that was no longer a distant possibility but an immediate reality. The sudden pivot from peacetime complacency to total war mobilization underscored the scale of the challenge and the urgency with which the United States had to respond. Strategically, the attack on Pearl Harbor forced a complete re-evaluation of U.S. military priorities. The Pacific Fleet, though damaged, was not entirely destroyed, and surviving vessels, submarines, and aircraft became crucial in halting Japanese expansion. Commanders recognized that regaining naval superiority would require careful planning, technological innovation, and coordinated efforts across vast distances. Simultaneously, the attack exposed vulnerabilities in American intelligence, radar systems, and communication networks, prompting immediate reforms and investments in early warning technologies. For Japan, the success of Pearl Harbor was initially seen as a triumph, temporarily securing dominance over the Western Pacific and Southeast Asia. Yet Japanese planners underestimated the resilience and industrial capacity of the United States, which, unlike any adversary Japan had faced, could recover, rebuild, and produce military assets at an unprecedented scale. This miscalculation would soon become a strategic turning point, as America's industrial output and manpower began to tilt the balance of power in the Pacific theater. The psychological impact of Pearl Harbor on the American public cannot be overstated. Families mourned thousands of lost lives, communities organized to support survivors and military personnel, and ordinary citizens transformed grief into resolve. Schools, workplaces, and civic organizations contributed to the war effort, while media coverage highlighted both the horrors of the attack and the heroism displayed by soldiers and sailors. The attack united a diverse population behind a common cause, forging a sense of national identity and purpose that had previously been fragmented by regional, political, and economic differences. This collective determination fueled recruitment, production, and innovation, ensuring that the United States would not merely retaliate but wage a sustained and ultimately overwhelming campaign against Axis powers. From the ashes of disaster emerged an unprecedented national effort, blending military strategy, industrial power, and social cohesion into a force capable of challenging the most formidable adversaries in modern history. Ultimately, Pearl Harbor became more than a military event. It was a catalyst that reshaped American foreign policy, national identity, and global strategy. The United States, once hesitant and cautious, embraced its role as a leader in the fight against fascism and imperial aggression. Decisions made in the days and weeks following the attack set the trajectory for the entire Pacific campaign, influencing battles in the Philippines, Midway, Guadalcanal, and beyond. Political leaders, military strategists, and ordinary citizens alike understood that the United States could not afford half measures or hesitation. The nation had been forced to confront not only the immediate destruction but also the long-term strategic imperative of defeating an aggressive adversary with global ambitions. Pearl Harbor ignited both a war and a transformation, creating a sense of unity, urgency, and determination that would drive America's efforts until victory was achieved. The aftermath of Pearl Harbor revealed the full scale of the destruction and forced both the United States and Japan to confront the consequences of their actions, albeit in very different ways. In terms of human cost, the attack was staggering. Over 2,400 American servicemen and civilians lost their lives, and nearly 1,200 were wounded, leaving families and communities across the nation in mourning. The ships and aircraft destroyed or damaged represented a massive blow to the U.S. Pacific Fleet. 8 battleships were present, with the USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma completely lost, and others, including the USS West Virginia and USS California, heavily damaged or sunk. Nearly 200 aircraft were destroyed on the ground or in the air, crippling the American ability to immediately respond with air power. Beyond the tangible losses, the psychological impact on the military and public was immense. The attack shattered the illusion of safety provided by the Pacific Ocean and demonstrated that Japan possessed the capability and audacity to strike deep into American territory, leaving the nation stunned and urgently aware that the war was now at its doorstep. Strategically, the United States faced immediate and difficult challenges. Naval commanders had to assess which ships could be salvaged, which ports required repair, and how to redeploy limited forces across the vast Pacific theater to prevent further Japanese advances. Aircraft carriers, notably absent from Pearl Harbor at the time, became the centerpiece of the rebuilding strategy, as their mobility and striking power offered the only viable path to regaining naval superiority. Simultaneously, shipyards worked around the clock, repairing damaged vessels, constructing new battleships, and accelerating the production of planes and submarines. Intelligence operations were overhauled, radar and reconnaissance networks were expanded, and defensive measures across Hawaii and the West Coast were strengthened to prevent any repeat of the surprise attack. The United States quickly transitioned from a reactive posture to a proactive one, turning the shock of Pearl Harbor into a catalyst for an unprecedented industrial and military mobilization that would sustain the nation through the brutal years ahead. For Japan, the attack initially appeared to be a decisive triumph. It destroyed a significant portion of the Pacific Fleet, temporarily secured dominance over Southeast Asia, and provided the opportunity to seize vital resources, particularly oil and rubber, from the Dutch East Indies and other territories. Japanese leaders believed the strike would intimidate the United States into negotiating peace, securing Japan's empire without a protracted war. Yet this calculation was fatally flawed. While the attack inflicted enormous damage, it failed to destroy critical infrastructure, including shipyards, fuel depots, and most importantly, the American aircraft carriers, which would later become the spearhead of U.S. counteroffensives. Moreover, it ignited a wave of American resolve that no diplomatic concessions could temper. Japan underestimated the industrial capacity, logistical reach, and sheer manpower of the United States, miscalculations that would prove decisive as the Pacific War unfolded. The destruction at Pearl Harbor also reshaped the early conduct of the Pacific War. With the United States suddenly forced into total war, military planners quickly shifted focus to a strategy of island hopping, securing key positions across the Pacific to gradually cut off Japanese supply lines and prepare for eventual offensives on Japanese-held territory. The Japanese, meanwhile, faced the challenge of consolidating their newly acquired territories while anticipating inevitable American retaliation. Every decision made in the months following the attack, where to defend, where to attack, how to deploy fleets, was influenced by the lessons of December 7th. Battles like Midway, Coral Sea, and Guadalcanal were directly linked to the consequences of Pearl Harbor, as the United States leveraged its surviving forces, intelligence, and rapidly expanding industrial output to turn the tide. The attack, intended to paralyze, instead galvanized, creating a chain reaction of strategic adaptation that ultimately undermined Japan's early advantages. In retrospect, Pearl Harbor stands as both a moment of devastating loss and a turning point in modern military history. The immediate physical damage was immense, yet it also catalyzed a transformation in American military doctrine, strategy, and national identity. The attack forced the United States to confront vulnerabilities, accelerate innovation, and commit fully to a global conflict whose outcome would shape the post-war world. Japan's temporary victory was undermined by a fundamental misjudgment: the belief that a single, shocking blow could intimidate an entire nation into submission. Instead, it provoked a determined, united response that harnessed industrial power, strategic planning, and human courage. The lessons of Pearl Harbor extended far beyond the harbor itself, influencing the conduct of World War II, naval warfare, and international relations for decades to come, setting the stage for a conflict that would test the limits of resilience, strategy, and the human spirit. The attack on Pearl Harbor marked the beginning of a new era, transforming the United States from a nation reluctantly observing the chaos of the world into a global military power fully engaged in World War II. The immediate destruction, the staggering loss of life, and the shock to national pride were only the beginning. In the months that followed, America demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for recovery, adaptation, and resilience. Shipyards and factories roared to life, producing aircraft, battleships, and munitions at unprecedented rates, while military planners developed strategies that would challenge and ultimately dismantle Japan's initial advantages. The psychological impact of the attack, rather than weakening the nation, forged unity, determination, and a relentless focus on victory. Ordinary Americans enlisted in droves, families contributed to the war effort through rationing and resource conservation, and the media amplified stories of heroism, inspiring the entire country to mobilize for a war that would span oceans and continents. Pearl Harbor became not merely a memory of loss, but a rallying point, a reminder of what was at stake and the price of unpreparedness, and a symbol of the determination to fight back no matter the odds. In the Pacific, the war that began with a single devastating strike evolved into a protracted struggle for islands, seas, and strategic positions, as the United States countered Japanese expansion with calculated offensives and a combination of naval, air, and ground operations. Key battles at Midway, Coral Sea, and Guadalcanal were directly influenced by lessons learned from December 7th, as American forces sought to avoid the mistakes of Pearl Harbor while leveraging the industrial capacity, manpower, and ingenuity that had been mobilized in response. Every campaign carried echoes of that morning: the importance of intelligence, early warning systems, and strategic flexibility became central to operational planning. By forcing Japan to respond defensively rather than offensively, the United States gradually shifted the momentum, demonstrating that even a nation struck with staggering force could recover, regroup, and ultimately turn disaster into a strategic advantage. The legacy of Pearl Harbor extended far beyond its immediate destruction, shaping naval doctrine, military planning, and the national psyche for years to come. For the American people, Pearl Harbor became more than an event in history. It became a story of courage, resilience, and collective action. Sailors who survived the attack, officers who risked their lives to save ships and men, and ordinary citizens who contributed to the war effort embodied a spirit that would define the United States' engagement in World War II. Their heroism was a reminder that even amid chaos and destruction, human determination and unity could overcome formidable challenges. The nation's rapid transformation from isolation to full participation in a global conflict demonstrated not only industrial and military power but also the capacity of a society to come together under a common purpose, fueled by outrage, resolve, and the desire to protect freedom. Pearl Harbor became a defining moment in American history, a lesson in vigilance, preparation, and the costs and responsibilities of global engagement. As we reflect on the events of that fateful day, it is clear that Pearl Harbor was both a tragedy and a catalyst. While the losses were immense, the response of the United States showcased the strength, resilience, and ingenuity of a nation determined to defend itself and its allies. The attack altered the course of the war, transforming initial setbacks into long-term strategic advantages, and leaving lessons for future generations about the importance of preparedness, unity, and strategic foresight. The bravery displayed, the sacrifices made, and the lessons learned at Pearl Harbor continue to resonate, reminding us that history is shaped not only by the battles we fight but by the determination with which we face adversity. It stands as a powerful example of how even the darkest moments can ignite a nation's resolve and set the stage for victory. If you found this detailed account of Pearl Harbor enlightening and want to explore more dramatic and educational stories from history, Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and press the bell notification button so you never miss the latest episodes in our war history series. Our mission is to bring history to life, to show you the strategy, politics, and human stories behind the battles, and to educate while keeping you engaged. By subscribing, you join a community of history enthusiasts who understand the power of learning from the past and witnessing how pivotal moments like Pearl Harbor shape the world we live in today. Don't miss the next episode. Stay with us as we uncover the epic battles, heroic figures, and pivotal decisions that defined history.